Hello, everybody, and welcome to yet another edition of the Middle Georgia Spotlight. I'm your host, Jack Ellis. We're glad to have you with us this week. And we want to thank our sponsors, Caduceus Medicine, Goggles Eye Care, and J. Franklin Automotives. And of course, we always thank the good people here at Mercer University, here at WMUB, Channel 38. This week in the Spotlight, well, let me say this. Since, Happy New Year, first of all. This is my very first show of this year. Ron Wildman, I'd like to thank him for sitting in for me while I was on a sabbatical in East Africa, and particularly in Uganda, where I served as the Honorary Consul of Uganda. Having said that, we have endeavored to have people from the local area, from the state area, and throughout the nation, as well as international. So I'm proud to say that today we have our first international guest, Bobi Wine, who is, let me see how I would class it. I'll let him describe himself. But the way the public is he's known to the public as an entertainer, a politician, a freedom fighter, and of course, to himself and his family, he's known as a husband, a father, and of course, a freedom fighter here in Uganda. So we'd like to welcome in the spotlight, Bobi Wine. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Jack, for having me.
Now, as I set this up, I'm the Honorary Consul for Uganda. I'm appointed by the government, but I represent Uganda, not a party. I represent the country of Uganda.
Yeah.
So says the State Department, who gives me my credentials. So I want to put that out and make it clear. But you are part of the government, and you're also you're Ugandan. And you're part of the government because the people said you should be a part of the government. You were elected, you weren't appointed.
Sure.
The election was fair, so you came to the top from being an entertainer. What drove that movement? What drove you, number one, to get into politics, and what drove the success that you had, that landslide victory, first time out?
First of all, I'm glad to be here. My name is Kyagulanyi Sentamu, that's my real name, but when I got into entertainment, I adopted the nickname Bobi Wine. I do many things. I studied to be an entertainer, and I'm an entertainer, I'm a musician, songwriter, actor, and I also do other kinds of work, casual work. However, because I was dissatisfied of what's going on and I was tired of waiting for somebody else to come and fix it for me, I went into politics and I was elected into the Parliament of Uganda in an election that I will not describe as free or fair, because that's not the character of our elections here. It wasn't free and fair, but we overwhelmed the regime. There was a lot of intimidation. The president invested more than 8 billion shillings to make sure he buys the voters, but we overwhelmed the regime, and I turned out to be the member of parliament.
Well, first of all, let me congratulate you as a former elected official myself, those of you in the Middle Georgia area aware of that, being the first and only black mayor of my city after many years of struggle. But so I understand what it is to be in the politics and how gratifying it is, especially when the people put you in politics, not when the special interests, but the people, the grassroots, put you in politics. What is going on in Uganda right now at the grassroots that caused this type of, we would call it what they had in the Arab, in Northern Africa, the Arab Spring. We'll call it, maybe this is the African summer, and it gets pretty hot in the summer. So what is driving this here in Uganda, especially with young people?
My overwhelming support, and indeed the support of many other leaders that share the same mindset with me, is evident of the sentiment on ground, the sentiment of despair, the sentiment of frustration. Uganda is primarily a young country where we have more than 80% under the age of 35. That means more than 80% of our population is younger than me, although I also consider myself a young person. And indeed, it is that percentage that is over 80% unemployed. The exclusion has been rampant and all that. So the Ugandan people, mainly the young people, are speaking out. They're speaking out through the leaders, although they are limited with leaders. So the people are speaking out in all ways they could, and that explains my rise. But again, it explains the constant fear of the regime. So what's going on in Uganda today is the effort by the government to make sure they crush any voices of dissent, both politically and socially.
Well, this show will be airing just at the weekend celebration of the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. holiday. And when I think of Dr. King, of course, a young man, died at 39, struggling for the people, died in Memphis, not died, was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee, at the age of 39, there to help garbage workers, the least of the people who pick up your rubbish that you throw away. He was there helping them, even though he had a PhD, and he was a young man. You are a very young man. Some people say that young people should, Nelson Mandela happened to say, you're never too young to lead, and you're never too old to learn. So, and Dr. King had had the success as such a young man, and he was speaking truth to power. And I definitely don't want to talk about Dr. King's demise when we talk about you, sir. But are you prepared to go all the way? Dr. King gave the all for the struggle and was prepared to do it, and said at once in one of his speeches, if a man hasn't found something he's willing to die for, he's not fit to live. Are you on that type of track?
I definitely agree with Dr. King. All over the world, Dr. King continues to be the inspiration, to be the embodiment of the values that we fight for. Now, the only difference is that Dr. King and his colleagues were being oppressed because of their color. Yeah. It is even worse to see that in Uganda, even after the end of colonialism, we are being colonized by our fellow black people, who are being oppressed by our fellow black people. And that is absurd. However, with constant reminders and inspirations like Dr. King, like Nelson Mandela, we realize that a life that is not lived free, a life that is not lived freely, is not worth living. And indeed, Nelson Mandela told it to us when he said that he has always cherished the idea of liberty and freedom. There's an idea that he's hoping to live for, but if necessary, it's an idea that he's ready to die for. I said it personally some while ago after being arrested and tortured by the military, which is supposed to be
Your government. The
our
government
government, the government.
You're saying that this government tortured you.
Yeah. Me together with 4 other members of parliament who were brutally arrested by the military. I was charged in the military court, even if I'm not a soldier, and I was framed. The government said that I had 2 machine guns, a claim that they later dropped. But however, I said it, that this and more, we expected it in this struggle for dignity and life, okay? I said it, that we must get our freedom or we shall die trying to get our freedom.
But let's be clear that, like Dr. King, you're a nonviolent person. You don't believe in guns. You don't have guns. You don't believe in that. This is not an armed struggle. This is a political struggle, a struggle of wills and the will of the people. Is that what we are?
Sure. This is completely a non-violent struggle. We don't believe in violence. When I was 4 years ago, President Museveni took over power with a group of young people using guns, but it shouldn't be noted that Uganda lost more than 500,000 people. More than 500,000 people were killed in the war started by President Museveni because he was promising better. 33 years later, he does not want to be reminded of the things that he said. It's remembered that on the day when he sworn in as president, as ex-rebel chief, he said Africa's problem, and Uganda in particular, are the leaders that overstand power. 33 years ago, when we people like myself, who are 4 years old when he came in, were fathers and soon to be grandfathers. So we despise violence. We want to differ from Museveni because we believe that a change that is peacefully attained and a change that people get together as a people is a change that will never be personalized and owned by one person. because President Museveni gained power by use of force and violence, by using the gun, that is what has made him hold us hostage. Yeah.
Now, of course, we're talking about at the bottom of all of this, we have high unemployment, especially among young people. The shilling is very, very low against the dollar. They trade about 3,800 to 1 today, which is not good, especially when you're importing stuff.
Yeah.
So this is an economic, it's a political issue, but it's also an economic issue. So what do you see the answers to the economic problem of having so many young people, well-trained, educated, but yet the economy is not working for them?
Our problem is socio-economic. Apart from this, the politics, you'll notice like that more people are sliding into poverty. It was showed by the Ugandan National Bureau of Statistics that more than 2 million people have slid into poverty in the recent times. And indeed, because there's so much economic injustice and economic inequality, you'll see that many of Uganda's young people are being shipped out of the country into self-enslavement, where they lose their dignity, but because there's no work around here. And indeed, even where the work is, even the government funds are being siphoned and stolen in broad daylight. So even the blatant corruption itself, which is cited right from the president's office, is a big, big, big economic misdeed to our people. So much as we are trying to achieve political freedom, we also want economic freedom. We also want social freedom, simply because the regime has very smartly impoverish the people, well knowing that patronage is their way of holding people on their side.
But
now,
you're saying the way out of this is at the ballot box. The next election here is 2021 as it stands now.
Yes.
I understand there's a challenge before the Supreme Court of the country as to whether it will be extended further than that, going from 5 to 7 years, I understand. But as it stands now in 2021. So you don't see any change coming before 2021 in terms of leadership, and that leadership will come about at the ballot box. Is that your commitment?
Certainly, certainly. My conviction is that we are not going to see any change unless if we change the people who are in office. Because much as we have a constitution, much as we have the law, much as we have institutions, they don't function because all power has been concentrated in the hands of the president, which president goes ahead to use it as a patronizing weapon, employing only his family members and only his tribe members and close friends. And that is all that we can change at the ballot box. Why? Because we believe that if we sensitize all these people to come out and speak through their voice, they will put an end to the corruption through their vote. They'll put an end to military rule through their vote. They'll put an end to economic injustice through their vote.
Well, let's say one thing. I don't know how much time we have left, but not much. But Uganda is a beautiful country.
Yeah.
Endowed by its creator with, just endowed with rich soil, the Nile, source of the Nile, Lake Victoria, mountains, valleys, can grow anything here, maybe 2 or 3 crops a year. Yeah. So, but yet you're importing foods that can be grown here and exporting maybe some food that should be eaten here. Yeah. So what's your vision? I'm not saying your plan as president because you haven't made that announcement, and I'm not asking you to make an announcement whether you would run or not. But I will ask you as a member of parliament and as a leader, I mean a leader with a big L. So many young people I've spoke to in this country.
Sure.
Up and down this country, and they believe in you.
Sure.
And a lot of them put in their hopes in you. What's your vision for the country?
My vision is a country that makes sense for everybody, that benefits everybody, that offers equal opportunities for everybody. Lucky enough, we have an endowed country. Originally, Uganda has always been an agricultural country, and agriculture has been supported in the past, supported even better during colonial governments, you see. So if we want Uganda to function, then we've got to make it possible for the rural people by empowering their agriculture. We are going to make life fair for all people. We're going to make, all people accountable. We're going to make, put in place ways that make people benefit from everything they're doing. For example, agriculture can be improved. But again, not only agriculture, we've got to also empower the traders. We've got to, as government, create market for the agricultural produce like it was in the past. We've got to create the right infrastructure like it was in the past. You see, everything that we want to achieve in Uganda has been achieved before. It was there. When I move in the rural areas, I see the defunct cooperative institutions that used to help the farmers. We see how the schools used to function that don't function anymore. We see how hospitals used to function that don't function anymore. So we believe that just by retracting our steps, by looking at the mega plan and how it used to work, we can reinvent it, we can re-accelerate it, and we can make it work again, because it has ever been functional. It's not that we are hypothetically thinking. No, we are only remembering what was happening here in Uganda, and we want it to work again. It's unfortunate that our leaders would rather not see the country function, because it's much more comfortable for them to sell us to other communities, like selling us to the Chinese and all these other foreigners, because that makes us more enslaved and more accountable to the Chinese and these other foreigners, who are in turn accountable to the leaders.
Well, we talked about the environment, the beautiful as it is, birds, fun, flowers, and everything, and I absolutely love it. And I promote it as its honorary counselor for people to come here, and that's my responsibility. But what we do have here, in addition to that, we have a large amount of college-educated young people, very bright young people, out of work, and they want to help build the country, and they're looking to you. And how does that fit upon your shoulders? I mean, you have broad shoulders, but how does that, when people put their hopes and aspirations in a leader like you, what do you say to these young people? Hold on, help is on the way, just bear down, what do you say?
Man, it is humbling and overwhelming to imagine the kind of responsibility and the kind of hope that fellow young people have in us. But I always say to them, like I'm going to say to them now, it is not only about me. I want to be the uniting factor of all this energy and the ideas. We have young men and women who are incredibly talented, who are incredibly intelligent. We have been coming together with them, and I continue to seek to come together with them, so we can together paint a blueprint of the country that we want to live in. I might have the zeal, I might be resolved to fight for what we want, but it won't take only me, it will take the hearts and passion and ideas of all of us to bring them together and draw a blueprint of the kind of country that we want to age in, the kind of country that we want our children and our children's children to inherit.
Now, you will have to give the country or the government, whomever is responsible, the people, some credit for the education system. Like I said, you don't get this many college-educated young people unless they have a foundation along the way in education. So would you give the current government credit for having built a good education system, but just not having jobs for people once they get educated? How do you rate the government on those who are responsible for the education of this country?
I would differ from you, because it has been like that. Ugandans have always been intelligent, and indeed, looking at our past, Ugandans have always been educated. Yes, many more Ugandans are educated because we are much more, but even looking at the quality of education, our people have been mainly educated to be job seekers, not job creators. Unlike countries like Cuba and all these other countries, Uganda, we do not export skilled labor. We export unskilled labor. It is so embarrassing to see that we export housemaids and house helps instead of exporting engineers.
Where are they primarily being exported? I understand to the Arabian Peninsula?
Yes, because the Arabian Peninsula wants low-level work.
And they're providing jobs.
Exactly.
So you're saying this is almost like forced labor or forced slavery?
This is more like forced slavery because we know, we get reports of what our sisters and brothers are going through, the kinds of physical and sexual abuses that they are enduring. But again, they don't get help from the government because they are treated more like a good riddance from Uganda. So I would not really credit the government for the kind of education they're giving our people. I strongly believe that considering the huge number of young people we have, we could skill them. And if we're to export labor, we should export skilled labor. Just like we import the Cuban doctors, we should be exporting Ugandan doctors and Ugandan engineers.
Well, obviously, we are almost out of time, I understand. And for those of you who are just joining us, of course, this is the Middle Georgia Spotlight. I'm your host, Jack Ellis, but we're coming to you today from Uganda, Kampala, Uganda, the capital of Uganda, a country that I serve as an honorary consul. And we're having a conversation with a gentleman, all of you who watch CNN, BBC, MSNBC over the years, last year would have heard of him, a.k.a. Bobi Wine, who is a member of parliament here in Uganda. He was an entertainer, very famous entertainer, family man, Catholic, but he's also an opposition to the current government, a government that I represent. I represent the country, so I don't try to split hairs, but I represent the country. The State Department vetted me to represent Uganda, not any political party, and I try to make sure I do that. But getting back to the young people and the development of the country, the infrastructure of the country, we see that the Chinese are building things and you're borrowing money. You're on the cusp of pumping oil. Will be coming out of, you know it's here. It's just a matter of getting it out of the ground into the refinery and out to the ports, and money will start flowing. How will that affect this country 10 years from now, 20 years from now?
I'm worried that what was supposed to be an oil blessing could otherwise turn into an oil curse. That's if it's not already turned into a curse. We have a president who has been in power for 33 years and counting. But again, it's the same president that makes an assertion like, this is my oil. So we have a president that actually is convinced that he owns the country's natural resources. So the more we are exposed to natural resources, is the more terror we are exposed to, because wherever there's a natural resource to benefit from the country, there is danger at the hands of the president.
Back to the economy. I look next door to Rwanda, small country, 2.5 million people. Obviously, the challenges doesn't have the kind of challenges that Uganda has. But what do you got? 40 million people here?
Yeah, we got over 40 million people.
But you're in the center of the action. You're bordered by DRC. You're bordered by Burundi, Rwanda, Kenya, Tanzania, and who else did I miss? South Sudan. So you're not a landlocked country, you are a land-connected country. That means you're connected to all these other countries, and you have the production capacity. What's the export to those countries, and what's the potential, and what's being done about it to maximize those potentials?
Well, our potentials have certainly not been maximized because we've not made those efforts as government. It is clear that the biggest preoccupation of the regime in Uganda is to maintain the grip on power. And that is why we've not had any railway connections with our sister nations, with our neighbors. We've not had any moral connection with our neighbors. And even recently, when we were trying to connect as young people from across the borders, you realize that our fellow leaders from Kenya were blocked from entering Uganda because they are seen as a threat. So our government here in Uganda is operating more on fear than on hope. They are scared of the connection with our neighbors because they think that we will be inspired by the change that is going on in various countries like Kenya. These people are changing leaders every night. Yeah, DRC there's an election, and Tanzania there's an election. So the regime here would rather have us locked, would rather make us believe that we are landlocked rather than believing that we are land connected.
Well, I have great hope for Uganda, and I plan on importing, because there are some things that you are throwing away here and taking for granted that people are paying big money for. One is called a jackfruit, and my name is Jack, so I really love that fruit. I was introduced to it here, so I'm going to start importing jackfruit from Uganda. And I've got to figure out whether I'm going to do the value addition, and that is taking whether I'm going to compensate the weight for the expense of manufacturing or what have you. But jackfruit in the States right now, and I want you all to, those of you who haven't tasted jackfruit, I want you to taste it. Not only is it tasty, but it's so full of nutrition and vitamins. Almost every vitamin and mineral is in that fruit, and it has the name of Jack. So those of you who don't like me or my political bent, you probably won't buy the fruit, but you should buy it anyway because it's good for you. And so I'm trying to decide. I'm not asking the government for a penny. I just see an opportunity, and I want to partner with some young people here to import jackfruit, because jackfruit is becoming a big thing, and no one knows where it comes from, but I know where it comes from. It's growing locally in everybody's backyard around here. So things like that. Do you set up a fund to help young people? Let's say a young entrepreneur would come with this type of idea, so but I need to manufacture. Here's my business plan. I'm looking at two business options. Either I import the whole fruit before I process it and don't create jobs, or I cut it here and get the fruit out and package it properly and refrigerate it and ship it and add these values, or what do I do, and where can I go to get some resources? Do you all have that type of resources together?
Yeah.
As Parliament, as a government?
Yeah. Besides Uganda being enormously endowed with natural resources, like you say, we have fruits. Man, it's amazing how many fruits or foods we have. Well, yeah. Many times I'm convinced to believe that this is the true Garden of Eden.
So do I.
However,
and I've said that before. I truly believe it.
Great. But that being said and that being known, we know that our problem is not the people, because everything is there. You'll note that Uganda was recently ranked the most entrepreneurial country. You know, this is where the biggest number of businesses are started. But again, this is where the biggest number of businesses fail. 90% of the businesses don't see.
The people not creating job creation. The unemployment rate is very high.
Yeah, unemployment rate. Exactly, it is high.
The youth is a big part of the population.
I agree with you, and this is because most of the businesses don't see their 5th birthday. Why? Because the government, the leadership does not make it any easier. This is the only country where you're going to be taxed for just starting a business or for registering a business. And that, on that, there's a bill, a startup bill that I hope to introduce to Parliament, hoping to address the challenge. However, I must also note that our Parliament has constantly degenerated into only a talk show, because much as we talk about these things, much as we resolve it.
A talk show or a reality show, which would?
It's more of just a talk show, because everything that we resolve.
All talk and no action, is that what you're accusing the body that you sit in?
Yes.
The people sent you from the north, from the central region, to represent them and their concerns, and you're saying that your colleagues are.
I'll say that because that is the truth. If we go and talk about things and resolve on behalf of our people, and then what we deliberate is not respected, If I don't call it a talk show, I beg to find a better word to use. Recently, when I was blocked from constitutionally practicing my profession, I went to Parliament, and Parliament resolved that it was illegal and unconstitutional for the police to stop me from practicing my profession. Guess what? The resolution of Parliament was disrespected. And not only that, I mean, sometimes we are always sometimes we're in Parliament deliberating, and the military will attack Parliament and beat up all members of Parliament, you know.
That's not funny.
That's not funny at all.
Exactly. I was taken aback. And some people, my friends, a lot of my friends in Atlanta called me and teased me about it. You represent this country? Yeah. Did you see what happened? Because it was all over it was not just like you have been all over the news nationally and internationally. I was in Atlanta and I saw you on the National Press Club in Washington. I was in Washington. I saw you throughout the Washington Post, and you were all over the news about some people were pressing the U.S. government, the State Department, to cut back funding for Uganda until you were treated fairly, until they had a full investigation of your arrest and or torture. But yet, and you were freed, you were arrested. I want to make sure I'm trying to let people know what type of person when I say what type, the caliber of a man we have on our program this week. And you were ultimately released, but claiming torture. When I say claiming, because the government said otherwise, and so you claim torture. I didn't examine you, but you know your body, and you seem to be an honest fellow to me. So if you say you were tortured, who am I to say you weren't tortured? But where is that now? Is that in the courts? Has that been resolved? They have dismissed it? Where are we with that?
Well, I beg to inform you that Uganda is a country, Uganda under Museveni is a country where despicable things will happen, and they are swept under the carpet. Many high-profile people have been murdered in broad daylight, and no single report has been given. On the day when I was tortured, I was brutally arrested, and my driver was killed. It was an assassination attempt on my life. And no sooner had I walked out of the car that the military, particularly the section of the military that's charged with guarding the president, the Special Forces Command, they fired at my driver. They murdered my driver in cold blood. And guess what? The president tapped them on the back. No single report has ever been released. Not only me, many other members of Parliament were tortured, but no report was given. So that is, in a way, trying to answer your question, that no report is ever going to be given by the government of Uganda about the brutal torture.
Now, in the U.S., the Congress has the power to investigate something like that, especially when it happens to a sitting member of Congress. You know, they would have a select committee, and they would do a full investigation. Has Parliament, first of all, does your Parliament have the power to form such investigation? And if so, have they? And if not, why not?
Ideally, they are supposed to have that power. As per our constitution, the Parliament is mandated. It has those powers. But, like I said, Uganda under Museveni is an illegal entity, okay? Uganda under Museveni is a lawless state because the president himself, using his mouth, told the Parliament that even if they investigated, they could not do anything to the army. This was the president of the country telling off the Parliament of the country. So it is important for us to first and foremost realize that we are in a country of lawlessness.
And this is a country that the U.S. government supports with hundreds of millions of dollars a year for defense forces working in Somalia, where Uganda has so many soldiers. I think the largest amount there, supported by the U.S. So the military here is supported of course, it's a strong military. It's a professional military, in my opinion. And let me tell you, I'm retired from the U.S. military, so I've been around. I know some of the generals in the military here. But it's a professional military. Is it really a professional military? At the end of the day, will this military stand and do what's right, or will it do what's convenient, or do what it's ordered to do?
First of all, our military is not conducting itself in a professional manner. It's a sectarian military. It's a brutal military. These are the same soldiers that brutalized me, you know. So it's certainly not professional at all. It is sad that the U.S. government invests millions of dollars, hundreds of millions.
I'll be meeting with the ambassador as we tape in here 2 days from now, and I'm going to have some of the things that you were saying here. I'm going to bring it to our attention.
I'll also mention this, that President Museveni has presented himself to the international community as the only beckoning of hope, as the only anchor of stability in the Great Lakes region. And that is how he has been able to blackmail the country and also lie to the international community. And by threatening to unleash instability to the region, he has been able to pull the strings and keep the international community believing in him as a person. I've raised it before, and I want to raise it now, that our development partners and the international community should deal with Ugandans and not Museveni, should deal with Ugandan institutions and not Ugandan individuals, because Uganda is going to be here much longer than Museveni, and it will be so much of a risk to anchor the stability of a country and indeed the stability of the region on an individual rather than institution. It would be terrible for the people, the taxpayers of the United States of America, to be in connection with an individual other than the people of the Republic of Uganda.
Now, to play the devil's advocate, and I don't like to use that word because the devil doesn't need an advocate, he has enough of them. But what the U.S. government would say to you is, and I'm not calling the U.S. government the devil, but they would say to you is, look, this man was duly elected by his people. He is the head of state. That's who we deal with, and that's who we will continue to deal with until the people say otherwise by changing the people. So here we're right back to square one, saying this is going to have to change at the ballot box.
Well, I respect the fact that the United States deals with a duly elected person, but I also recognize the fact that the U.S. government has values that they stand for, and that is why the U.S. government stopped dealing with people like Gaddafi and Saddam when they lost their credibility and legitimacy. The United States, I believe, has noted the human rights abuses that have been ongoing in Uganda. For example, in Kasese, where more than 150 people, including men, women, and children, were killed. I'm sure the United States government has been taking note of the blatant election riggings. I'm sure the United States government has been taking note of all the human rights abuses. And I know that the U.S. has a Magnitsky clause that warrants for their disconnected engagement with the people that are not complying with their value system, and that's what Uganda is doing. So our humble hope and prayer to the United States administration is that they do not continue being partners in crime. They should deal with Uganda to do the right thing in the benefit of the people of Uganda, not in the benefit of one individual.
Well, you know, we've talked some real heavy, this is some really, really, some geopolitical stuff here that you have shared with me and shared with my audience. That's a lot of food for thought. But let's get back to now, like you said, at your core, you are, in addition to being a husband, father, and a businessman, you are an entertainer.
Yeah,
You're an
I'm
entertainer. I mean, you came. Your popularity came through your music, and you. But yet you, if one would listen to your music and understand it, obviously I don't understand all of it because it's in a different language. But as it explained, that you have it. But you have a Bob Marley theme going through you, where there's revolutionary themes throughout your music. Am I correct?
Sure. I'm inspired by the freedom fighters that came before me. I did not start this. I born into this, and when I see oppression, I talk about oppression. I was greatly inspired by people like Bob Marley, people like Fela Kuti, and I hope that I also inspire those that come after me.
Well, look, let me tell you, this has been more than a pleasure, but I can't end this show without. I noticed that you picked this paper up. I picked it up on the streets this morning, and I noticed you looked at it. And the headline reads, Bobi Wine cannot oust Museveni. So says the opposition. And we see that, maybe we can get a shot of that. And I'm not saying you believe everything you read, and obviously we're not going to say it's fake media, but that's what's out there, and that's what some of. So, but I guess from what I hear you saying, that it's not about Bobi Wine defeating President Museveni. It's about the people.
Exactly. I, in a way, agree with them, but I go further to tell them that that's a wrong statement. You know, indeed, Bobi Wine cannot oust Museveni because it's not about Bobi Wine. I don't represent Bobi Wine here. I represent people power. I represent the energy that connects all the oppressed people of Uganda. And if they said that the people of Uganda cannot oust Museveni, I would vehemently disagree with them. It is not a Bobi Wine thing. We are not acting as Bobi Wine. We are going to act as the people of Uganda. And I can guarantee to you that we, as the people of Uganda, particularly the young generation, we can and we will put an end to the Museveni dictatorship.
Well, there you have it. First of all, let me thank you very much for joining me here in the Middle Georgia Spotlight. Member of Parliament, I can't pronounce his name, so I'm not going to butcher it. I'm just going to call him what he's known for widely throughout Uganda and now around the world as Bobi Wine, a member of Parliament in opposition to the current government, National Resistance Movement government, and of course a great leader of his people and an entertainer, as I said, a family man, businessman, husband, father, churchgoer, and a freedom fighter. And I want to say one thing before we go. We have a couple of young men. We were talking about the unemployed young people in Uganda. I happened to, by happenstance, met a young man this weekend on an island that I have a lot of love for here called Kalangala, and he was doing some video. And I had an idea that I wanted to interview parliamentarian Bobi Wine, and he agreed to help me with this video. And so here again, McCary trained, great videographer, no jobs, making his own way by doing shows, finding opportunities here and there. And I want to thank two young men. I wish they could cut to each other so I could see them. And I want to thank you all so much for your help. And Bobby, again, thank you so much.
Let me also say this. Many times I communicate verbally and I miss out on communicating musically, and yet over the years, communicating musically has been able to even make my point more clearly. So I'll just say this on behalf of the people of Uganda, that we are living in a time similar to the one of slave trade. This oppression is worse than apartheid. The gun is the master and the citizen slave. The pearl of Africa is bleeding. Question, what is the purpose of the what was the purpose of the liberation when we can't have a peaceful transition? What is the purpose of the Constitution when the government disrespect the Constitution? Where is my freedom of expression when you charge me because of my expression? See what you're doing to our nation. What are you teaching the future generation? See, our leaders become misleaders, and see, our mentors become tormentors. Freedom fighters become dictators. They look at the youth and say, we are detractors. We are fighting for freedom. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you all for joining us this week here on the Middle Georgia Spotlight for Bobi Wine and for the young men who are helping me behind the cameras here. Coming to you from Kampala, the capital city of Uganda, on the shores of beautiful Lake Victoria. What's the name of that lake before it was Lake Victoria? I don't like Lake Victoria.
It's actually not Lake Victoria. It's called Lake Nalubale.
Lake Nolambade. The British changed it when I butchered it, but I want him to say. I want him to say it again. I want you all, whenever you come here, especially people of color, don't take the name that the British just took and changed when they made it Queen Victoria. Name it the name that it was before. What is that again? What is that again?
Yeah, Lake Nalubale. Nalubale means the lake of the gods, the meeting point of all the gods. That is our lake.
On the shores of that beautiful lake where all the gods meet. I'm your host, Jack Ellis. Until next week.